A construction crew bores through rock beneath the Tsushima Strait. The water above them is 300 meters deep in places. They are not halfway through yet. This tunnel would not just connect two countries, it would physically link the Asian mainland to the Japanese archipelago for the first time in recorded history. And almost no one outside of East Asia knows it is being seriously planned. Japan and South Korea sit roughly 200 kilometers apart at their closest points. That gap has always been a kind of moat, protective in some eras, isolating in others. The proposed Korea-Japan tunnel would close it permanently. The estimated price tag sits at around $22 billion. Some analyses push that figure considerably higher once land infrastructure is included. The idea is not new. Engineers and politicians in both countries have floated it since the 1970s. But the project has accelerated in recent years as both nations reassess their economic futures and regional connectivity becomes a strategic priority rather than just an engineering dream. The proposed route would run approximately 210 kilometers in total, making it roughly 4 times longer than the Channel Tunnel between England and France. 4 times. That is not a margin. That is a different category of project. There are 2 main alignment options that engineers have studied most seriously. The first route runs through Tsushima Island, the Japanese island group roughly halfway between Kyushu and the Korean coast near Busan. The second route takes a more direct southern line, bypassing Tsushima entirely. The Tsushima route is generally considered more practical. It allows for intermediate construction islands, breaking the tunnel into segments rather than forcing one unbroken boring operation beneath open water. That distinction matters enormously when you are talking about drilling through the seabed of one of the most geologically active ocean floors on the planet. The geology beneath the Tsushima Strait is not cooperating. The seabed is composed of volcanic rock, soft sediment layers, and unstable clay zones that shift under pressure. Tunnel boring machines, the massive cylindrical drills that chewed through the Alps and under the English Channel, face extreme friction and heat at these depths. The Channel Tunnel sits at an average depth of about 45 meters below the seabed. Parts of the Korea-Japan route would require boring at depths approaching 150 meters below the ocean floor. At that depth, the engineering margins become very thin. The boring machines being considered for this project would need to be among the largest ever built. Current generation TBMs measure around 17 meters in diameter for major rail tunnels. Engineers working on preliminary Korean proposals have estimated that the machines for this corridor would need to operate continuously for years without returning to the surface for major maintenance. The cutting heads alone, the circular saw faces at the front of each machine, would be replaced by robotic systems operating in pressurized chambers. No human could safely enter that space mid-boring. The logistics of keeping a machine drilling in the dark, kilometers beneath the ocean floor, for years at a time, that is the engineering problem no one has fully solved yet. There is also the question of what happens when something goes wrong. The Seikan Tunnel in Japan, which connects Honshu to Hokkaido under the Tsugaru Strait, experienced a near-catastrophic flooding event during construction in 1976. Workers were inside the bore when water broke through. 27 people drowned. The Seikan Tunnel is 54 kilometers long. The Korea-Japan Tunnel would be nearly 4 times that. The risk envelope does not scale linearly. It compounds. South Korean engineers have been the most active in studying the technical approach. Research teams at major Korean universities published detailed boring plans as far back as 2003. The Korea Tunnel Institute has maintained active research for over 2 decades, proposing a phased construction plan that would take approximately 17 years from groundbreaking to first train. 17 years of continuous, uninterrupted underwater construction. That figure assumes no major geological surprises. History suggests that is not a safe assumption. Now here is where the project stops being an engineering question and becomes a political one. Japan and South Korea have one of the most complicated bilateral relationships in the developed world. Disputes over wartime history, territorial claims over islands both countries call their own, trade tensions and diplomatic ruptures have stalled cooperation on far simpler projects than a transcontinental tunnel. In 2019, the relationship deteriorated so sharply that South Korea considered withdrawing from an intelligence sharing agreement with Japan. Trade barriers went up. Political leaders stopped meeting. A tunnel requires not just agreement on day one, it requires decades of sustained political cooperation between two governments that have repeatedly failed to maintain it. And then there is the question of who actually pays. $22 billion is the round number that gets cited most often. But infrastructure economists who have studied the project independently put the realistic construction cost between $40 and $80 billion once overruns, soft sediment remediation, landside rail connections, and ventilation infrastructure are factored in. The Channel Tunnel, for comparison, came in at nearly double its original budget. The Sydney Metro overran by billions. The Boston Big Dig finished at 3 times its initial estimate. Large tunnels almost never come in at their projected cost. The Korea-Japan Tunnel would be the most complex boring project ever attempted. There is also the revenue question. The tunnel would only make financial sense if enough passengers and freight use it to justify the debt service on construction loans. Current ferry traffic between Busan and Fukuoka, the most active crossing point, handles roughly 1 million passengers per year. Tunnel proponents argue that number would grow dramatically if travel time dropped from 3 hours by ferry to under 90 minutes by high-speed rail. That argument has merit, but it rests on projections about economic integration that are themselves uncertain, particularly given that Japan and South Korea have spent the last several decades building separate, nationally focused infrastructure ecosystems. There is one more dimension that rarely appears in the construction coverage. If the tunnel connects to South Korea, it also connects, in theory, to the rail network of North Korea. A train from Tokyo could, under conditions that currently seem impossible, run all the way through the Korean peninsula, across China, and eventually into Europe via the Trans-Siberian Railway. That vision has been discussed in academic and diplomatic circles for decades. The Trans-Asian Railway Network is a real planning body that has mapped such routes. Whether it ever happens depends on political conditions that no engineer controls. But it shapes why certain governments remain interested in this tunnel, even when the economics alone do not justify it. A tunnel is not just infrastructure, it is a permanent physical bet on what the future of a region will look like. As of the mid-2020s, the project remains in the planning and research phase. No formal intergovernmental construction agreement exists. No ground, or seabed, has been broken. South Korea has invested more formal state energy into the concept than Japan. Some Japanese policy circles remain skeptical, citing cost, geology, and the political relationship, but the tunnel gets reassessed every few years. New administrations take office, relations improve, engineers publish updated boring plans. The conversation never fully closes. What remains is a proposal that is technically possible, barely, financially enormous, politically fragile, and geologically dangerous. Every one of those problems has a theoretical solution. None of them have a guaranteed one. The Tsushima Strait is cold, deep, and does not care about deadlines. Whether this tunnel eventually gets built, or whether it becomes one of the great unbuilt projects of the 21st century, it has already forced engineers on both sides of the water to ask questions that no one has answered before. That alone changes something about how the next generation of builders will approach the problem, if they ever have to. The story of this project is still being writ,